Woohoo! There is some spicy information going on right now about a Nintendo Switch revision, a Nintendo Switch Pro, and the release date for this system. New information coming to us from a new report from Bloomberg and Mr. Mochizuki from Bloomberg. Now, if you've been following our saga of this Nintendo Switch revision, he is a name that has popped up many times because I like covering stuff like this. I've always said where there's smoke, there's fire, and I definitely felt that there was something going on with this. There's been so many things that just seem to be coincidental, and in the video game industry, I don't feel like coincidences actually exist. I think everything is done with a calculated and strategic manner. Well, Mochizuki put up a new report last night on Bloomberg's website, and there is a ton of information about a Nintendo Switch revision, what sort of screen it's going to have, when this system is potentially coming out, and when this system is going into production. So obviously this is a story and a saga we've been covering for a long time. There's been a lot of people who feel like, oh, this is just a fairy tale, this isn't going to actually happen, but it seems like it is, and it seems like you might have this in your hands in 2021. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to like the video. But without any further ado, let's talk about this new report from Bloomberg, what is being said in it, and what I think about this information that's being provided. So let's cut through the BS and get right into the report and talk about some of the key things from this report, because it's actually a pretty detailed report and very specific with things, almost to the point of where it's like, you have to believe this. This isn't some random guy on Reset Era called FartKnocker69 talking about something like this. This isn't some random Reddit or random tweet. This is Mr. Mochizuki from Bloomberg, and Bloomberg has been pretty spot on with other things, such as the Nintendo Switch Lite that of course ended up coming out in 2019. So kicking things off, we have to talk about the screen on the Nintendo Switch Pro or Nintendo Switch Revision, whatever the hell you want to call it. We don't know what Nintendo is going to call it, but it is going to have a different screen in terms of size and picture clarity. So this new screen, according to this report, is a 7-inch Samsung OLED screen. Now, if you know anything about OLED screens, you should know that they look absolutely beautiful. Look at something like the PlayStation Vita, the first model of it, which actually had an OLED screen. Yes, resolutions were a bit subpar on that system at times, but it didn't really matter because you got so much better pixel density, you got so much better lighting, contrast, brightness for these games. Colors just really popped on the PlayStation Vita, the first series of the system, and this was in fact due to the OLED screen. Now, we've heard things about mini LEDs, we've heard things about OLEDs, and it seems like Nintendo is going with OLED technology when it comes to this screen. Now, like I said, this is going to be a 7-inch screen, which is actually larger than what we have on our standard Nintendo Switch model right now. The standard Nintendo Switch is a 6.2-inch screen, and the Lite is a 5.5-inch screen. So this is going to allow for better picture clarity when it comes to when you're playing your games on your Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. And let's be realistic, when games run at 720p on the Nintendo Switch in handheld mode, I think they look great. The problem is when you get things like Vaseline smear or downgraded resolutions with a lot of these games in handheld mode, especially more taxing third-party games, that things become a bit sticky. But I feel like this OLED screen will sort of alleviate a lot of those issues and a lot of those problems, and even potentially make your older games look better because you have this new screen on there. It's kind of like when you get a better television and you play the same games on your new television that you played on your old television. You could definitely notice a bump up in things like picture clarity, and of course in things like colors and whatnot. Now, allegedly this screen is going to be 720p, and a lot of people seem to be like, that's unacceptable for this, blah blah blah, and I can understand your sentiment. I never thought it was going to be a 1440p screen like that ridiculous Nintendo Switch leak we talked about a few weeks ago on the channel, but a lot of people were expecting it to be a 1080p screen. Now, I don't really have a firm grasp on a lot of things like this, such as what these resolutions mean in terms of battery life, so I'm actually going to highlight a tweet done by Jeff Grubb from VentureBeat and pretty much just gank his tweet and show you guys his image, because I think this does a good job of explaining to people who aren't as technologically inclined, such as myself, to understand that this is actually going to be potentially a good thing. So looking at his tweet, he shows basically what the pixel density and viewing distance calculator for a Retina world is. So essentially your eyes aren't even going to notice this sort of difference when you are doing something like a 720p screen. Obviously a lot of this is going going to be done by the OLED technology that is going to allow for better colors and better clarity. But really, when you look at things like this, most of your games on your mobile phone run at 720p because it would eat up the battery life. And that's something we've talked about from time to time, is conserving the battery life of your Nintendo Switch when it is in handheld mode. Now, the OLED is actually going to allow for better battery life as well, but you don't want to sort of offset that by having a screen that's going to potentially drain your battery a lot quicker than some other games would. So I think this is a smart decision, and I really don't feel like it's something that's going to be a big deal. If this was a successor to the Nintendo Switch, then maybe you can make a case for it, but I just feel like 1080p on such a small screen, a 7-inch screen, is just a waste of resources at this point in time. This isn't like playing a game in 720p on a 55-inch television where you start to see things like jaggies and notice sort of things. This is downscaled onto a small screen. So I think this picture quality is going to be amazing. And shout outs to Jeff Grubb for sort of breaking this down, because I think he did a good job of conveying the message with it. This isn't me damage controlling a 720p screen. This is just me being realistic with it. As long as games look good, I don't care what the resolution of it is. If they're able to do things like 60 frames per second in handheld mode instead of having to sacrifice things like that because of this new screen and new technology in the Switch, I think that's a win. And really, let's be realistic. Look at your lineup of Nintendo Switch games right now. They all run at 720p or less in handheld mode, and you really weren't complaining about it all that much. So if anything, your old games are going to look even better on this new OLED screen, and you're not even going to notice something like a minuscule 1080p to 720p resolution upgrade on a 7-inch screen. Next up, the article says that production for the Nintendo Switch revision has not hit the market yet, but it is anticipated to hit production in the month of June. Now, I know there's been some rumors recently floating around out there. Supposedly, the Nintendo Switch revision was already in production, but according to this report, it is not in production. It will be going into production in the month of June of 2021. So that sort of gives you a bit of a runway for when the system is going to release. We'll get more into the system's release date as the video goes on, because that's sort of the last point I want to end on. But the system allegedly is not in production as of yet, but it will be going into production in the month of June. Now, here's where things get very exciting though. Supposedly, this Nintendo Switch revision has 4K ultra high definition graphics when paired with a television, meaning that in docked mode, you will be getting up to 4K resolutions on your Nintendo Switch revised model. And it doesn't go in to say how it's going to achieve that 4K. I'm still not sure that it's going to be something like native 4K. I definitely think DLSS technology is going to be used in this Nintendo Switch, because it just makes sense. If you watched any of my videos talking about this Nintendo Switch revision, NVIDIA made the Tegra chip for the Nintendo Switch. The Tegra chip supports DLSS. They've been doing artificial upscaling on things with the Tegra chip for many years now. So it makes perfect sense for this to be a thing, because it'll obviously keep the cost of these games down. Now, you could still scale these games to run in 4K, and if developers want to take advantage of that, they sure as hell can. But I feel like this allows Nintendo flexibility with their games. They don't have to program a game to run in 4K if the innards of the Nintendo Switch is allowing them to upscale them to 4K. But I think the more interesting thing about the 4K revelation for this Nintendo Switch revision, according to this report, has to be the fact that this is pretty much confirming that the innards of the Nintendo Switch Pro or Nintendo Switch revision are going to be different than the standard Nintendo Switch that is currently on the marketplace. Because while yes, technically the standard Nintendo Switch can do 4K, it's not designed to do 4K. So because of that, it is throttled at 1080p. So if you're alleviating these things and you're basically expanding upon the resolutions of these games, you are now introducing new hardware into this revised model. It's not going to be a successor to the Nintendo Switch. It's literally going to be what I have said this entire time, a mid-generation refresh. If the system is 4 years old and you want this system to go for another 4 years, you have to sort of keep up with the Joneses. And what better way than to introduce a new Nintendo Switch model that plays all the same games, but maybe plays them a little bit better, maybe makes the games look a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, and allowing things like DLSS to upscale these games is going to be a major game changer for the Nintendo Switch, because I really feel like the future of video games is not in just raw power. It is more so in this artificial intelligence that allows companies to upscale their games via the software and via the hardware inside of the system, instead of just relying strictly on the hardware to make things like 4K graphics. So that is a big point for me right there, is the fact that yes, it seems like these games are going to be 4K compatible, but how they reach that 4K is the more exciting things, because once again, you could see potential upgrades in previously released Nintendo games due to things like this artificial intelligence that is upscaling these games, which would make games like, I don't know, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 look a hell of a lot better when you are playing this game, and to me, that's a very exciting facet. But of course you have to launch a game alongside of a new piece of hardware, don't you, to get people excited for it. So what game could potentially launch this holiday season alongside of it? You know, maybe something that's, I don't know, celebrating its 35th anniversary, something that we've seen a little bit of a teaser for, but haven't really seen much beyond that. A game that we don't really know a whole hell of a lot about, but we do know there's going to be a large celebration for this game and the game's franchise. And of course, a game that, I mean, let's be realistic, would definitely benefit from being done in 4K visuals, and that of course is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, folks. Could you imagine this holiday season if Nintendo releases this new Nintendo Switch model alongside of Breath of the Wild 2, and they show you what this game is capable of running on this new Nintendo Switch model? It's going to sell ridiculous. It's going to be a huge phenomenon. I think this system has the potential to be a better stopgap than something like the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X was in terms of sales, because with those systems, you did sort of want that sort of stuff, but you didn't really need it. You didn't really need it because these systems were still very powerful at their core. I never upgraded my PlayStation 4. I still have my base PlayStation 4 and my Xbox One S, but something like the Nintendo Switch, something that would actually benefit from things like a brand new OLED screen when you're playing it in handheld mode, something that takes the graphics from 1080p to up to 4K and has a little bit more power for those first party games, is honestly a lot more interesting to me than something like a PlayStation 4 Pro was, because really the differences were a bit negligible. Yes, you got things like better frame rates on those systems, but still, this is obviously going to be a larger jump in terms of what you actually notice, and I think that's going to be a very successful thing for Nintendo. So get on the hype train, man. It looks like this is happening in 2021, holiday 2021. If this system does come out and Breath of the Wild 2 does come out alongside of it, like, holy hell, man, it's going to be absolute pandemonium to get your hands on these systems, but I will find a way because I want one. So let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this report coming to us from Bloomberg. Obviously, there's a lot of credentials going into this. Everyone's pretty much just accepting it as fact, and it's pretty much at the point where you do have to accept it as fact, as something is coming in 2021, and I think it's going to be very exciting. Should you want to read the full Bloomberg report, I'll have a link to it in the description box down below, but I mean, there's really no point because you already watched my video. So let me know what you think of everything in the comments down below, and as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel as well. And no, I did not wake up early and film this or anything like that. Don't get me twisted like that. This came out at 10 a.m. Eastern time. I'm probably currently sleeping right now because I'm doing this video at night, because that's when I feel creative and that's when I get excited about stuff. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.